Hi everyone and welcome to today's demo. Today we're going to be doing bubble tea. So bubble tea is one of these things that's become very popular and trendy recently. And if you've ever had bubble tea out, you'll know that for what it is, it's actually really expensive. So I'm going to show you today how to make two different types of bubble tea at home, both using the same boba or tapioca bubbles. These are bubbles that you're going to have to buy in a specialty store. So I've experimented with a variety of different bobas, white tapioca, 2 different or 3 different brands before I finally realized that the black tapioca are really the best. So this is a huge bag of boba, but you can see that it's kind of like a brown color here. Now, it doesn't look like it's black until it's actually cooked and you see the starch. It just sort of looks like a light brown in color here. But we purchased these from our local bubble tea shop and they were happy to sell them to us. You could probably buy these at most Asian markets, but you specifically want to look for ones that are sort of brown or black in color and labeled as used for bubble tea, because the white ones just sort of disintegrate and fall apart. So we're gonna start out today by boiling water for our boba. So when we boil water for our boba, it's kind of like with pasta. You want a lot of water for relatively a small amount. I'm going to be making about 1 cup of tapioca bubbles or boba today, which will generate enough boba for like 4 nice sized drinks. Boba does not keep, okay? So you can't make a large quantity and think that you're going to be able to reuse it on like another day. If you make boba, it's because you want to eat the boba. They're best served at room temperature. You never really want to put them in the fridge because they'll firm up too much and then you just sort of lose the texture. Okay, so the first thing that we're actually going to do today is we're going to bring our water up to a boil on the stove. So you can see behind me, I have a nice medium-sized pot. This is perfect for 1 cup of boba. And then I have a pitcher here with just cold tap water. Okay, so you want to start out from cold because you don't want your boba to start to release starch too soon. And also hot water sometimes has a bad taste to it. So I'm just going to turn this up to high. I'm going to put my lid on and I'm going to let it do its thing. And while I wait for that to come up to a boil, I'm going to get started on my heavy syrup. So boba need to soak in something to sort of give it some flavor. Otherwise, it's just a tapioca bead that really doesn't have a lot of flavor to it. So in this case, I'm going to be making a brown sugar syrup. So you can make any type of heavy syrup that you like. You could make a vanilla syrup. You can make a fruit-based syrup like a passion fruit syrup. But a brown sugar syrup is one of the more common ones, and it's one that's used in a lot of the large bubble tea chains. So in order to make our heavy syrup, we're going to actually be using our scale. And I'll actually use a 4-cup measuring cup. Now, it might seem like overkill because I'm actually only going to be making a 200-gram recipe of heavy syrup, but I'm actually going to transfer my boba in here afterwards when they're cooked to soak, and then I'm going to use this as my vessel to sort of hold both my syrup and my boba. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my measuring cup on my scale. So again, this is a 4-cup measure. A 2-cup might be okay, but I always find that it's better to have too much space. I'm going to turn on my scale. I'm going to make sure it's tiered or set to 0. And then I'm going to be measuring out 200 grams of water and 200 grams of brown sugar. And this is going to create our simple syrup. So this is just regular brown sugar. I believe this one here is light brown sugar. You can use dark. If you're feeling so inclined, there's actually a rock sugar that you can purchase in Asian supermarkets, which is what they use. It's called black sugar. And that's what they actually are using in most tea shops. So it's a more molasses heavy brown sugar. $1.76, $1.95. Perfect. So I'm at 200, and then I'm going to put my brown sugar back over here because I actually need a little bit of that for my boba. And then I'm going to start by adding in the remaining water that I have left here. So I'm going to tare again, hit 0, and I'm going to start. Okay. So I have now 200 and 200. Now, there's a bunch of different ways that I can heat this up. and make my simple syrup. I can do this on the stovetop if you're so inclined, or you can just go ahead and pop this in the microwave. This is a microwave safe Fire King measuring cup, so go ahead and pop it in there for 2 to 3 minutes until all the brown sugar is dissolved and it's sort of homogeneous and it looks kind of like heavy and syrupy, okay? You might have to give it a stir partially way through your cook time. So we'll do 3 minutes and we'll see where it's up to afterwards. I'm done with my scale for the rest of this recipe because everything else is either by taste or by eye, and then for my boba, I'm just using a 1 cup measure. So I've added an additional minute on my microwave time. I gave it a stir at the 3-minute mark, but remarked there was a little bit too much crystallized sugar that was still left at the bottom, so we've popped it back in now. And at this point, it looks great. So if I look at the color, it should resemble kind of like dark maple syrup almost. And all of my sugar has disappeared into my water. It's uniform in texture and in color. Okay, so I'm now going to set that to the side. I'm just going to let it cool down, take the edge off a little bit, and when it's cool enough, I'm going to pop it into my refrigerator. Or if you live in Canada and it's minus 10 degrees as it is right now, you can pop it into your outdoor fridge, as I like to call it. So my water is almost up to a boil, and I'm actually going to recycle the same spoon that I was using before. And so like pasta, I would normally add salt into my water if I was cooking pasta, and with rice you kind of do the same, add a little bit of salt. But since this is more like a dessert, we're actually going to add a little bit of our brown sugar into our water. So my water's almost up to a boil here. I'm going to let it come up to the rest of the rolling boil. But I'm going to pop about 2 nice sort of eating tablespoons into my water, and this is just to help kind of absorb the boba or the tapioca bubbles, to absorb some of the flavors as they're cooking, because as we know, yes, they're going to soak up more flavor when they're sitting, but they are going to soak up some of the flavor while they're boiling here. So my water's up to a rolling boil. It's pretty angry. I'm going to measure out 1 cup of boba here. And I'm going to take my lid off. I'm going to pour my boba into my pot here, and I need a spoon. I'm immediately going to stir them around, and then I'm actually going to reduce them straight down to minimum, the same way I would if I was making rice. Now, I'm going to pop my lid back on and just be diligent for the first few minutes. But I'm going to set a timer for 30 minutes. And these are going to simmer for 30 minutes on this element on low. And then immediately after the 30 minutes, I'm going to turn my element off. I'm going to leave my pot on the element, and I'm going to put an additional 30 minutes back on. So it takes an hour total for you to cook your boba from start to finish. During the 30 minutes that they're on the element with the heat on, you need to periodically stir these. So every like 5 to say 10 minutes come by, and just make sure that you're giving them a stir with your spoon. You want to make sure that you're doing that because the tapioca has a tendency to try and clump together and stick, and you really don't want that. The idea is, number 1, to keep them free moving in the water at all times, and number 2, to make sure that there's enough water so that the boba are swimming in there and they're really not all just clumped and stuck together. So my timer just rung on the stove, and I'm now going to turn my boba off. So that was just at minimum for that 30 minutes. Now I'm going to let it sit for the next 30 minutes here just on the element, which is still hot. I'm now going to set another timer for 30 minutes. And when I come back, those boba will be ready to be put into the simple syrup. So I'm at the last 17 seconds of my second 30 minutes. I have my simple syrup here that I've already made and has cooled on the counter or in the fridge until it's sort of like room temperature. I also have in my sink a strainer for my boba, and I'm going to be straining and rinsing them. So I'm going to take my boba over to the sink, and I'm going to be putting the boba through the strainer, and and I'm just going to quickly give them a rinse. It's really important that my boba drain properly in the strainer before I add them to the simple syrup, because I don't want to dilute my simple syrup. So I'm going to just kind of shake them around a little bit. And I want you to take a look at these now that they're cooked. So they are very kind of like almost gelatinous looking in terms of the texture of them. They look very similar to fish eggs, if you've ever seen fish eggs before. And we're just going to go ahead now, since most of my liquid has drained off, I'm going to empty them into my simple syrup, and I'm going to stir them up, okay? Just to make sure that the syrup coats all of the boba with its sugary goodness. Okay. So I'm now going to take this and I'm going to set it aside, and you want your boba to sort of soak in the syrup for like say 10-15 minutes. You don't want them to soak for too long because otherwise they'll start to cool. Ideally you want to use them fairly quickly after you finished making them. So now we're going to talk about the two different types of teas that we're going to be making. So the first tea that we're going to be making is my husband's favorite tea, and it's a black tea. It's called a milk tea. And then I'm also going to be making a green tea passion fruit. So my first tea, I'm going to start with my glass here, and then I'm going to take my boba, which are here, and I'm going to ladle some of my boba, including some of my syrup, into the bottom of my glass. So you want a pretty big glass for this. And then in the second shot, maybe less syrup and just more boba. So that's a nice amount. It's about an inch at the bottom of my glass. And then I'm going to take my black tea, which I brewed ahead of time and have allowed to cool down because I don't want to dilute my drink too much by having my ice melt. So I'm just going to strain this. This is loose leaf tea, and it's full leaf as opposed to broken leaf tea. And it's a Ceylon blend. So I'm going to fill this up, say about half to 2/3 of the way. So when I look for tea that I brew, I want something with a larger leaf. So this is a Ceylon type of tea, and it's actually from the international section at Walmart. It's very reasonably priced for a really big box. And there's two types of loose leaf tea that you can buy. You can buy something called broken leaf and then something called whole leaf. So this is a whole leaf tea, and you can see how large the leaves are in the tea, and when they expand in the pot, they grow quite a lot. Now, I put about 3 to 4 nice large teaspoons into my pot here, and I want to let that brew for a long time. The longer the better for something like this, because you want a really strong tea. Now the next thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to put my ice into my drink, and I want quite a bit because this is all room temperature stuff, right? Like my tea is room temperature. And the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of milk, and I'm going to top it up with milk. And you'll see when your milk goes in, it kind of goes into the top and then settles down into the bottom. And the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our boba straw, and we're just going to give it a nice stir, and you can see all the boba that are in there that are sort of dancing around in there, and that looks fantastic. We're just going to give it a the boba are sweet and tender, and the tea is fantastic. It's pretty potent, but it's delicious. It's nicely balanced. So now I'm going to make my second tea. I'm going to take another glass, and I'm going to do the same thing with my boba. I'm going to put my boba in the bottom. And I want to make sure this time that I get less syrup, because I'm actually using juices in this. So because of that, I don't want it to be too sweet. When you go to a bubble tea place, they'll actually ask you how sweet you want it. If you don't specify, they just make it the way they normally do, which is fairly sweet. So I have my boba in the bottom, and then I'm going to use a product. This is a pre-brewed green tea, and this is a jasmine green tea that's sweetened with honey and sugar. And you can buy this in a lot of international sections at the grocery store, or if you have a Chinese grocery store near you, that's fantastic. You can buy it at Kowloon or at T&T. So I'm going to fill up my glass here, same thing, about 2/3 to halfway with my green tea. And the tea is usually the base for most of your bubble teas, although you can get bubble tea that's just juice, which we often get for my kids. So same thing, gonna put a bunch of ice in there. And then I'm gonna top it with a juice. Now, you can top it with different juices. Some people like mango, I like passion fruit. So there's two different products that you can buy. This is Rubicon. You can get this at a lot of international sections at the grocery store, so Superstore, Super C, Food Basics, places like that. And then this one is really awesome, and this is a pure passion fruit nectar, so it's a little bit more pure than the Rubicon is. This is a bit thicker, and I got this at Ladle, which is a Lebanese store, okay? So I'm actually gonna top this with that. And then the same thing, I have another boba straw here, and I'm just going to stir up my tea, and you can see all of the dark little boba at the bottom. And this is fantastic. You definitely have to give this a try. It's a lot less intimidating than you think. Just make sure that you have the right ingredients. You want to make sure that you have the right black boba, not the white ones. And it's definitely money saving, especially now where we can't really go out and get all the things we want always when we're at restaurants. So order a few of bobas online or pick some up at your local tea shop, and then you'll be able to have many teas to come of your choosing. Enjoy.